morning sun rose slowly over the small town, casting its light on cracked sidewalks and tired houses that had seen better days. Inside one of those houses lived a woman named Clara. She was a black server at the local diner, a woman known for her tired smile and quiet strength. Clara's life had never been easy, but she carried herself with dignity, even when her pockets were nearly empty. Every day she woke before dawn, tying her worn apron around her waist and making the long walk to the diner. Her shoes were old and pinched her feet, but she couldn't afford new ones yet. The bills piled up on her kitchen table, and the leaking roof of her house reminded her that no matter how hard she worked, she always seemed to be chasing stability she could never quite reach. At the diner, Clara's days were long and exhausting. She rushed between tables with heavy trays, balancing plates of pancakes, cups of coffee, and stacks of toast. Customers often barked orders without so much as a thank you. Some left good tips, most did not. Still, she smiled, because that was part of her job, serving with kindness even when her body ached and her heart felt heavy. Her boss was strict, always watching, reminding her not to waste time chatting with customers or giving extra food. He cared about money more than people, and Clara often felt the sting of his sharp words when she lingered too long near a table or tried to comfort a lonely customer. But no matter how harsh he was, Clara never let his cruelty harden her heart. At home, life wasn't easier. Her paycheck barely covered rent and groceries. She cooked simple meals, rice, beans, soup that stretched for days. Sometimes she skipped dinner so her niece, who lived with her, could eat more. She told the girl she wasn't hungry, but in truth, her stomach often growled through the night. Still, she never complained. The neighbors admired Clara quietly, though few truly knew the depth of her struggles. They saw her as a woman who carried on no matter what, a woman who smiled at children on the street, who gave directions to strangers, who always greeted others warmly even when she was exhausted. But behind that kindness was a woman holding herself together with pure will. There were nights when she sat by her window, staring at the stars, wondering if life would ever give her a break. She thought about her dreams from long ago, dreams of traveling, of having a stable home, maybe even opening her own little cafe one day. But those dreams felt like smoke, slipping further away each year. All she could do now was keep working, keep surviving even though Clara had so little. She gave what she could. If a homeless man walked past the diner, she sometimes packed a roll or a leftover sandwich in a napkin and slipped it into his hands when the boss wasn't watching. If a child came in with no money, she offered them a glass of water and a smile. She believed kindness mattered even when it seemed small. Her life was a cycle of struggle, but she never lost her humanity. She carried a deep sense of compassion that couldn't be broken by hardship. And though she often felt invisible, just another tired server in a small town, her heart carried a quiet strength that others couldn't see. Clara didn't know then that her kindness would one day change everything. She didn't know that the small sacrifices she made, the food she gave away, the gentle words she spoke, would come back to her in ways she couldn't imagine. At that moment, all she knew was the struggle, the endless balancing of bills, the aching feet, the long hours, the sharp words of her boss, and the heavy silence of her small, dimly lit home. But behind those struggles lived a heart that refused to stop giving, a heart that would one day be remembered by two children whose lives she touched in a single evening. For now, though, Clara only knew the weight of her present. She rose each morning tired but determined, tied on her apron, and faced another day at the diner with a weary smile. She didn't know destiny was watching, waiting, ready to reward her when the time was right. It was a rainy evening at the diner, the kind of rain that fell in heavy sheets, making the world outside look blurred through the foggy windows. The few customers inside sat with their coffee mugs, staring out at the storm while the hum of conversations mixed with the clinking of cutlery. Clara moved quickly between tables, her shoes squeaking against the wet floor. She was tired from the long day, but she kept her smile as she always did. Just as she carried a tray of hot soup to an older couple, her eyes wandered to the large glass window near the entrance. At first, she thought it was just shadows moving in the rain, but then she looked closer. Two small figures stood huddled together under the awning outside. Their clothes were drenched, their hair clinging to their faces. They weren't moving toward the door. They were just standing there, staring inside at the plates of food. Clara felt her chest tighten. She knew that look. It was hunger. The kind of hunger that went beyond being late for dinner. It was the hunger of children who hadn't had a proper meal in days. When she set the tray down in front of the couple, she leaned closer to the window for another glance. The two figures were clearer now. A boy and a girl no older than 10 or 11. Their shoes were worn out, their coats too thin for the weather. Their faces were pale, and their eyes wide with longing as they followed every plate of food that passed through the diner. For a moment, Clara hesitated. Her boss's strict warnings rang in her ears. Don't give away food. This isn't a charity. If they can't pay, they can't eat. She knew what would happen if he caught her. He would scold her, maybe even cut her hours. But then the girl outside pressed her small hand against the glass. Her tiny fingers left a foggy print. Her eyes locked onto a plate of pancakes on a nearby table. Clara's heart ached. She could almost hear their empty stomachs growling. Clara finished serving the couple and quickly wiped her hands on her apron. She moved closer to the door, pretending to adjust the mat. Her eyes flicked to the children again. They looked so fragile, as if the storm itself might sweep them away. She opened the door slightly, the smell of rain rushing inside. The children flinched at the sudden movement. The boy stepped in front of the girl protectively, his thin frame trying to shield her. "Hey there," Clara said softly, kneeling a little so she wouldn't tower over them. "You two okay?" The boy's lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat worked as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, he shook his head slowly. The girl whispered, her voice barely a breath. "We're just hungry." Those 3 words pierced Clara deeper than any scolding from her boss ever could. Her eyes watered, but she blinked back the tears. She gave them a warm smile. "Come inside, it's too cold out here." The boy shook his head quickly, pulling his sister back. "We don't have money," he said. His voice cracked, but his pride was clear. "We don't want trouble." Clara's throat tightened. She admired the boy's courage, his instinct to protect his sister even in hunger. "Don't worry about that," she said gently. "You let me handle it, just come in and warm up." The two hesitated. Their eyes darted nervously toward the counter where the boss stood. But Clara waved them closer. Her smile was like a soft blanket in the storm. Slowly they stepped inside, dripping water onto the floor. Their clothes clung to their skinny frames and their shoes squished with every step. Clara quickly guided them to a booth in the corner. Away from her boss's view, she handed them napkins to dry their faces. "Sit here, I'll be right back," she said kindly. The boy held his sister's hand tightly under the table, his eyes full of both fear and hope. The girl leaned against him, shivering but smiling faintly. In the kitchen, Clara moved fast. She filled 2 bowls of soup, grabbed bread rolls, and added 2 small slices of pie. She covered them with napkins and carried them out. Her heart raced. She knew she was breaking the rules. But in that moment, rules didn't matter. Humanity did. When she placed the food in front of them, the children froze, staring as though they couldn't believe it was real. The girl's eyes filled with tears and the boy whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Before pulling the bowl toward his sister first, Clara sat down for a brief moment across from them. "Eat slowly," she said softly. "It's all yours." The children began eating, their hands shaking as they lifted the spoons. The warmth of the soup seemed to bring color back to their faces. The boy made sure his sister ate more than he did, pushing the bread toward her even as she tried to share it back with him. Clara watched quietly, her heart swelling. Around the diner, a few customers noticed but said nothing. Some even smiled faintly, touched by the sight. But Clara's boss hadn't seen yet. For now the children were safe, warm, and fed. Clara felt a quiet relief wash over her. She didn't know who they were, where they came from, or what would happen after this night. But she knew one thing: she couldn't let them go hungry. She didn't realize that this small moment, this one act of kindness, would live in their hearts forever, and nearly 2 decades later, it would return to her doorstep in the most unimaginable way. The children sat quietly in the corner booth, steam rising from the bowls of soup in front of them. For a moment they didn't even eat. They just stared at the food, as if afraid it might disappear if they touched it. Their wide eyes reflected both hunger and disbelief. Clara leaned against the edge of the booth, watching them with a gentle smile. "Go on," she encouraged softly. "It's for you, don't be shy." The boy glanced up at her, his lips trembling. "We don't want to get you in trouble," he whispered. His voice was raspy, as though speaking itself took effort. Clara shook her head firmly. "Don't worry about me," she said. "I've been in trouble plenty of times before, but right now, you need this more than anyone else, finally." The boy lifted his spoon and dipped it into the soup. He passed it first to his sister, holding it carefully so she could take a sip. The little girl's eyes closed as the warmth touched her lips. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she tasted comfort. She swallowed slowly, and when she opened her eyes again, they glistened with tears. Seeing her sister's reaction gave the boy courage. He began eating too, though he paused often to check on her, pushing more bread her way, breaking pieces of his roll to make sure she had enough. Clara noticed every gesture, the way he protected her, the way he sacrificed his own portion so she could eat more. It broke her heart and warmed it at the same time. Clara slid into the booth across from them, resting her chin on her hand as she watched them devour the meal. She didn't care if her boss noticed, not right now. The diner's rules seemed small compared to the quiet miracle unfolding in front of her. "What are your names?" she asked gently after a while. The boy looked up, hesitant. "I'm Daniel," he said, then motioned toward the girl. "This is my sister." "Lila." "Daniel and Lila," Clara repeated softly. "Those are beautiful names. How old are you two?" "I'm 11, Daniel said, sitting up a little straighter. "Lila is 9. Clara nodded, her heart heavy as she studied their faces. They were too young to look so worn down, too young to have eyes that carried such sadness. "Where are your parents?" she asked carefully, not wanting to push too hard. Daniel hesitated, his spoon stirring the soup even though the bowl was nearly empty now. Finally, he whispered, They're gone." His voice cracked on the last word. His sister lowered her head, clutching her piece of bread tightly as if it were the only anchor keeping her steady. Clara reached across the table, resting her hand gently on Daniel's. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, her eyes filled with compassion. She didn't need the details, the loss was written all over their faces. For a long moment they ate in silence, the only sound the faint clinking of spoons against bowls. Outside the rain continued to pour, but inside that small corner of the diner, there was warmth. When they finished their soup, Clara stood up. "Wait here," she said with a smile. She hurried back into the kitchen. Her heart pounding, she knew she was taking a risk, but something inside her refused to stop. She grabbed 2 sandwiches from the shelf, slipped a slice of pie into each, and wrapped them carefully in napkins. She returned to the booth and slid the parcels across the table. "Take these with you," she said. "For later." Daniel's eyes widened. "We can't—" "Yes, you can," Clara interrupted gently. "You'll need it. Trust me." Lila looked at her with wide, tearful eyes. "Why are you being so nice to us?" she asked softly. Her small voice carried a question that only children with hard lives ask, a question of disbelief, as though kindness was a rare treasure. Clara smiled faintly, her throat tightening. "Because once, when I was younger, someone was nice to me when I needed it most. I never forgot it, and now it's my turn. That's how kindness works. It keeps going." Lila leaned against her brother, holding the sandwich to her chest like a gift. Daniel lowered his gaze. Struggling to find words, finally he said, "We'll never forget this, ma'am, I promise." Clara reached out, brushing Lila's damp hair away from her face. "Don't call me ma'am. Just call me Clara," she said warmly. At that moment, her boss's voice rang out from across the diner. "Clara, what are you doing back there?" His tone was sharp, suspicious. Clara froze for a second, her heart racing, but then she straightened her shoulders. She wasn't ashamed of what she was doing. She walked back toward the counter, leaving the children tucked safely in the booth. By the time she returned, Daniel and Lila had eaten every crumb and were holding the wrapped sandwiches tightly. Their faces looked different now, not completely free of sadness, but lighter, as if someone had reminded them that the world still held kindness. Clara crouched beside the booth, lowering her voice. "It's still raining. Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Daniel hesitated again, then shook his head. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice trying to sound braver than he felt. Clara wanted to do more. She wanted to take them home, to give them a bed, to make them safe. But she knew her life was fragile too, her paycheck too small, her bills too heavy. Still, she squeezed his hand gently and whispered, "Be strong for her, Daniel. And remember, better days are coming." The children nodded, their eyes shining when they finally left. Stepping back into the rainy night, Clara stood by the window, watching their small figures disappear into the darkness. Her heart ached, but she also felt a quiet peace. She didn't know it then, but those 2 orphans would never forget her. And 18 years later, the memory of this one act of kindness would bring a helicopter straight to her doorstep. The rain outside had softened into a drizzle by the time Daniel and Lila finished their meal. The diner had grown quieter too, most of the customers already gone home, leaving only the faint clink of dishes being washed in the back and the hum of the overhead lights. Clara stood near the counter pretending to wipe it down, but her eyes stayed on the two children. They looked warmer now, their cheeks less pale, their small bodies no longer trembling as much. The soup and bread had given them comfort, and the sandwiches she had wrapped for them were clutched tightly in their hands like treasures. Clara wished she could freeze the moment, keep them safe, keep them fed, keep them close. But she knew the world didn't work that way. Her boss's sharp eyes scanned the room from the kitchen door. He grumbled something under his breath, but thankfully he didn't notice what Clara had done. For that, she silently thanked the heavens. Finally, Daniel slid out of the booth, pulling his sister gently by the hand. Lila looked back at her pie plate, as if wishing for just one more bite, but Daniel whispered, "Come on." His tone was protective, the way a boy twice his age might sound. Clara's chest ached watching him. Just a child, yet already carrying the weight of being someone else's shield. Clara quickly walked over before they reached the door. She crouched to meet their eyes, her voice soft but steady. "You two take care of each other, all right? And remember, you're not alone in this world. There are still good people out there, don't forget that." Daniel nodded quickly, his lips pressed together. He seemed afraid that if he spoke, the emotion in his chest would spill out. Lila, however, threw her arms suddenly around Clara's neck. Hugging her tightly, Clara froze for a moment, then wrapped her arms around the little girl, holding her close. Her apron dampened from Lila's wet clothes, but she didn't care. "Thank you," Lila whispered into her ear. Her voice was soft, shaky, but full of something powerful, gratitude that words could barely hold. Clara pulled back just enough to smile at her, brushing her damp hair back with one hand. "Be brave, sweetheart," she said. "You've got a strong brother, and you're stronger than you know," the girl nodded, tears shining in her eyes when they stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh after the rain. The streetlights cast long golden reflections across the wet pavement. Clara stood at the doorway, her hand resting on the wooden frame as she watched them. Daniel walked with his head held high, gripping his sister's hand tightly. His small shoulders hunched as if bracing himself against the world. But his steps were steady, determined. Lila clutched the wrapped sandwich to her chest. Glancing back once at Clara, she waved weakly, and Clara lifted her hand in return, her throat too tight to call out. The sight of their small figures moving down the street tugged at her heart until it hurt. The sound of their shoes splashing through puddles grew fainter with every step. Their silhouettes grew smaller and smaller until finally, the shadows of the night swallowed them. Clara stood there long after they were gone, her apron still damp from the little girl's embrace, her heart heavy with a mixture of sorrow and hope. She wanted to run after them, to bring them back inside, to give them a bed and blankets, but she knew she couldn't. She could barely keep her own life together. Her house leaked when it rained. Her bills were never fully paid, and her kitchen shelves often stood half empty. She didn't have the means to give them what they truly needed, and yet as she turned back inside, her heart whispered, "At least I gave them tonight back in the diner." The boss barked at her to clean up faster. His voice was sharp, but she barely heard him. Her mind was still on the children. Her hands moved automatically, stacking plates, wiping tables, sweeping the floor. But her heart lingered outside on that wet street when her shift ended. Clara walked home through the damp night, her feet sore, her clothes heavy with the smell of grease and rain. As she passed the alley near the diner, she paused, her eyes scanned the shadows, part of her hoping to see the children curled up somewhere safe. But the alley was empty, silent except for the dripping water from the rooftops. The years rolled by quietly, like pages turning in a book no one noticed being written. Clara's life didn't change much after that rainy night with Daniel and Lila. She still woke before dawn, tied her apron around her waist, and walked to the diner with tired steps but steady determination. The world outside kept moving forward, new cars, new shops, new faces, but her days looked the same. She was still the black server in the corner booth of the town's only diner, balancing trays, pouring coffee, smiling even when her back ached. The tips came and went, sometimes enough to ease her week, often not enough to cover the bills. Her landlord grew older but no kinder. The roof leaked worse, the walls cracked deeper. Yet Clara carried on, one day blending into the next at times. She thought about Daniel and Lila. She would glance at the diner's foggy windows on rainy nights, half expecting to see two small faces pressed against the glass again. But they never came back. The memory of them began to feel like a dream, as if the hug from Lila and Daniel's quiet bravery had been just a passing moment in her tired life. Still, every time she saw a hungry child on the street, she thought of them, and when she slipped a roll of bread into someone's hand or poured an extra cup of coffee for a stranger, she whispered silently to herself, "For Daniel and Lila, wherever they are." Her own struggles never stopped. The bills piled higher, her body grew slower, and her boss remained as sharp-tongued as ever. She often told herself she didn't mind. Kindness was free, and giving it cost her nothing but a scolding now and then. But deep down, she sometimes wished her life had been different. She sometimes wondered why the world never rewarded those who gave the most. The seasons kept changing. Winters brought biting cold. When Clara worked in 2 sweaters under her apron to keep warm, summers left her drenched in sweat as she ran between tables. Spring and autumn blurred by in rains and winds. Always the same walls, the same cracked floors, the same clinking of coffee cups. Her face grew older, her hands more wrinkled, but her smile never left. It wasn't the smile of someone carefree, but of someone who had learned to carry burdens quietly. The townspeople admired her in their own way. She became Miss Clara to everyone, a fixture of the diner, as familiar as the old jukebox in the corner. But behind the familiarity, loneliness often crept in. Her niece, the girl she once raised like her own, grew up and moved away for work. Clara encouraged her, proud of her independence. But when the evenings came, the house felt emptier than ever. Some nights she sat by her window with a cup of weak tea, staring at the sky. She would think of the 2 children and wonder, did they grow up safe? Did they ever find happiness? At times she convinced herself they had forgotten her, that she had only been a passing face in a difficult chapter of their lives. But even then she never regretted what she had done. She told herself, if nothing else, at least I gave them one night where they felt seen. One night where they weren't hungry. Time moved on and Clara grew older. Her hair turned silver, her steps slower, her back bent slightly from years of carrying heavy trays. Some customers noticed and offered kind words. Some didn't, but Clara never asked for sympathy. She had always been strong. She didn't realize that far away in another city, 2 young lives were growing under the memory of her kindness. Daniel and Lila carried her words like a torch, her face, her voice, the taste of warm soup on that rainy night. They were never forgotten. Each step of their journey was fueled by the belief that there were still good people in the world. Because one woman had proved it, but Clara didn't know that. To her, the memory of them was fading like a picture left too long in the sun. She told herself they were probably somewhere far away, maybe starting families of their own, maybe never thinking of her again. The years passed until nearly 2 decades had gone by. Clara had learned to live with her struggles. With her quiet, simple life, she had stopped expecting miracles, stopped waiting for her luck to change. Then one afternoon, everything changed. It was an ordinary day. Clara was folding laundry on her front porch, her apron still around her waist from the morning shift. The street outside was quiet, only a few children playing in the distance. The air was still heavy with summer heat. She paused for a moment, wiping sweat from her forehead, when suddenly the sound began, a low, powerful hum in the distance. It grew louder and louder, rattling the windows, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The children on the street stopped playing and looked up, shading their eyes against the sun. Neighbors stepped outside, confused, whispering to each other. And then Clara saw it, a helicopter cutting through the blue sky. Its blades sliced the air with a thunderous rhythm, sending dust and leaves swirling in every direction as it descended. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen a helicopter so close, let alone one landing near her modest little home. Her neighbors gasped, pointing, some covering their ears against the roar. Clara stood frozen on her porch, her laundry forgotten, her hands trembling as she gripped the railing. She whispered to herself, "What on earth?" Her voice cracked. She had no idea that the moment she had been waiting for, without even knowing it, was finally here. The years of struggle, the nights of loneliness, the prayers whispered for 2 children she thought she'd never see again. They were all leading to this moment. The passing years had tested her, but now they were about to reward her. Because inside that helicopter were two people she once saved with nothing more than a bowl of soup and a heart full of kindness. And now they had come back to her. It was a hot afternoon, the kind of day when the air felt heavy and the smallest task drained all the strength from your body. Clara had just returned from the diner, her apron still tied loosely around her waist. She had folded her sleeves up to her elbows and was hanging laundry on the clothesline in her small front yard. Each shirt fluttered weakly in the sluggish breeze. Her house looked as humble as ever. Chipped paint, a sagging porch, but it was her home. And she loved it despite its flaws. The street outside was calm. A few neighborhood children kicked a ball back and forth, their laughter echoing faintly. An elderly neighbor watered her plants, waving at Clara from across the fence. It was an ordinary day in every way until it wasn't at first. Clara thought it was just thunder, a low rumble rolling across the sky. She looked up, squinting against the sunlight, but there were no clouds, only the vast blue stretching endlessly. Then the sound grew louder, sharper. It wasn't thunder. It was mechanical, rhythmic. Like the beating of a giant's wings, the children stopped playing, the ball rolling into a gutter as their heads tilted back. The old neighbor froze with her watering can midair. Even the dogs in the distance began barking. Their ears twitched nervously as the sound swelled. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She gripped the wooden railing of her porch, her eyes scanning the sky. The sound grew so loud it seemed to shake the ground beneath her feet, and then she saw it, a helicopter, massive and gleaming under the sun, slicing through the sky. Its blades churned the air with powerful force, sending ripples of wind rushing through the street. Gasps erupted from the neighbors. "A helicopter, here!" someone exclaimed. Children ran to the sidewalks, pointing with wide eyes. Adults stepped out of their homes, shielding their faces as dust and leaves swirled around them. Clara could hardly breathe. She had never been this close to a helicopter in her life. She had seen them on television, heard them in the distance during news stories, but never landing in her quiet little neighborhood. The sheer noise was overwhelming, rattling her windows and shaking the laundry line until clothes fell into the dirt. The helicopter lowered slowly, the blades churning like thunder. Its shadow swallowed her house, the grass bending under the force of the wind. Clara's apron whipped against her legs. Her silver hair tossed wildly around her face. She shielded her eyes with one hand, staring in disbelief as it descended onto the empty patch of land across from her house. The children screamed in delight, jumping up and down. "It's landing! It's landing here!" Neighbors clutched their chests, whispering nervously. Who could that be for?
Why here?
Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She whispered to herself, "This must be a mistake. It can't be for me." Her voice was barely audible over the roar. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her chest. The helicopter's skids touched the ground with a heavy thud. Dust and dirt swirled around in a storm, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. The roar of the blades continued for a moment before finally slowing, the sound softening but the energy still crackling in the air. The neighborhood had gone completely silent. All eyes fixed on the strange machine sitting in the middle of their quiet street. Clara's knees felt weak, her small house, her simple yard, her life of routine. It all looked impossibly small compared to the sleek, powerful helicopter that had landed before her. Her neighbor whispered from across the fence, "Clara, what's happening?" Clara shook her head, unable to answer. She had no explanation, no idea why something so extraordinary had come to her ordinary doorstep. The side door of the helicopter opened with a hiss. A staircase unfolded and two figures stepped out. The sun shone against them, their clothes neat, their posture confident. They walked with purpose, their eyes scanning the crowd until they found Clara.